Your third option for your one-point perspective project will be these one-point perspective rooms. Now these can get really creative and super fun, but they are also one of the more complex options. This is actually, it's probably the most complex option out of the three. So I would make sure that if you want to choose this option, that you spend a lot of time practicing on those shapes and where your converging lines need to go and things like that. And I would also take some time to sketch your ideas out first, get an idea of where you want to place things. Don't just start going crazy with your design until you kind of have a plan with it. So in this video, I'm going to go quite a bit slower than I would on the others, just so that we can pay very close attention to all these little details and all the things that we need to learn and understand. So just be patient and be sure to pause this video as needed. And I would watch this all the way through and then begin sketching your idea so that you know how to go about this, the best way to lay out your design and the items in your drawing. So to start, we have to do the same thing as we normally would do. We have to find out where our vanishing point is going to be. So a room is a little different because you're not going to be able to see where the sky meets the ground, and you're not necessarily going to be able to see where that horizon line would go. So how we're going to start this out is we're going to draw a box in the middle of our paper. And then what I like to do is I like to get a line, or I like to get a rectangle drawn in the middle of that paper. And how I do that is I go from corner to corner using my ruler, and I create an X in the middle of my paper. And so I know that that's where my vanishing point is going to be. And then from there, what I do is I like to create a box using those lines that I've made with that X. And you can see what I'm doing here. You can see that it's pretty easy to create a line. Just make sure that you're making those nice right angles. Use the edge of your paper to line that up. Once you get the four sides of your rectangle drawn, you will then go in and erase that X in the middle of the rectangle. And you'll see that in a second. But you need to be sure to leave your vanishing point so you know where you are drawing. And once you get those lines erased, again, leave your vanishing point, you will have the back wall of your room. So you'll see that when I get those nice and clean and erased, but my vanishing point is still there, it now looks like that rectangle is going back into space. So that is our wall, and you will be able to go in and touch up those lines if you erased any of those, and make sure that they go all the way to the edge of the paper. Now you'll see I have my back wall. I have all four walls. So I have these straight up and down walls, the side walls. And when you're doing this, you always need to make sure that you're lining stuff up to the edge of the paper or to the vanishing point. That's going to be very important to make this look realistic. When you're doing a right angle, make sure your ruler's lined up to the top of your paper or the side of your paper. That's going to just help us keep things nice, straight, and clean. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by drawing a door. And you will want your door to be straight up and down. So I'm going to draw one vertical line that's nice and parallel to the edge of my paper, but also parallel to that back wall. So that's a good reference point. And I'm going to choose how high I want the door to be, and I think that looks pretty good. So what you'll have to remember is that things closer to you are going to be a little bit taller and bigger, and things further from you are going to be shorter. So you'll notice that I drew the line of the door that's closest to us a little bit taller, and that's going to help create the correct shape. So when you are drawing a line that goes back into space, things that need to look like they are in perspective, that's when you're going to use that vanishing point. So whenever you draw stuff that's either parallel to the top of the paper or the side of the paper, that's when you'll use those right angles in your paper to line it up. But any other lines, you need to be using your vanishing point to create those. So I'm going to create a frame around the door just to give it a little bit more detail, make it look a little bit more realistic. And this is very similar to the process of that door at first, except That back part of the frame, the one that's further from us, I'm going to make sure it's a little bit smaller, a little bit more narrow than the frame that we have really close to us. And again, line it up to the vanishing point. Make sure you're always using those reference points to make it look realistic and in perspective. As you go through, you can always be checking those tiny details and make sure that you're cleaning stuff up where it needs to be cleaned up. I just added little hinges on the side of the door just to make it look more realistic and give it those nice little thoughtful details. I'm going to go in and add some baseboards. And you can add these details however you want. Just remember that whenever you are using your vanishing point, things are going to get closer or bigger to you when they're closer to you and smaller when they get further away from you. So we need to make sure that our baseboards are parallel to that line, but also using that vanishing point. So actually they won't be parallel, excuse me. We need to make sure that we're using that vanishing point. So you'll see that the baseboards are a little bigger closer to me and a little smaller. And I realize I need to fix it on this right side, so I'm going to clean that up a little bit and get those lines a little bit more exact. So the first big object that I want to draw in this room is going to be a bed. I'm going to need to decide how high I want the bed to go up. So I'm going to start with the foot of the bed, which is the part of the bed where your feet would go. So the one closest to us, because I want that headboard to be on the back wall. So you have to think about what's a realistic height for this bed in relationship to the rest of this room. So I'm going to put a dot there and see if I like where that is, and I think I want it a little lower. That'll help you kind of reference where it might go. So I'm going to draw the straight horizontal line using the edge of my paper to line it up and get those nice parallel lines to those tops of my paper. I'm going to draw a horizontal line and kind of guess and figure out how big I want the width of my bed. So I think that looks pretty good. And if you feel like you need to make it a little bit wider at any point, you can do that. And if you feel that you need to change it up at all, you can always erase stuff. So make sure that you're drawing these things light until you get them exactly where you want them. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to decide how tall I want that bed to be on that back wall. So that bed's going to be sitting right in that corner. So I'm just going to draw a parallel line to those top and bottom of that back wall. And I'm just going to make it go all the way to that corner because you're most likely going to stick that bed in the corner. And then I'm going to decide how to handle the mattress and the kind of like thickness of that bed. So I'm going to draw those straight lines down on the foot of the bed and then create another horizontal line to that first line I drew for the foot of the bed. So if you just want to watch this for a second and kind of see how I go about it, you'll notice that I erased those lines for the baseboard because you're not going to see those through the bed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my converging line to create that kind of bottom of the bed frame that we're going to have to make it look realistic and match with the headboard. And then once I get those lines set, I'm going to use the headboard to draw my straight up and down lines. And this is going to take some practice. This is going to take some kind of stepping back from your work and making sure that you have it in a really good spot so that it looks realistic. And you'll notice that as you work through stuff, you're going to have to erase lines and kind of figure out the best place for things, and that's okay. Just make sure that you're always paying attention to where things are going and how they look, and make sure that they're always in perspective. So when I'm drawing this left corner of the bed frame, I'm going to need to take a converging line from the corner, the left corner, all the way to that headboard. And then I'm going to erase the corner of the headboard and just have that look nice and realistic there. I might need to extend the headboard a little bit to make it look like it's actually sitting in that corner. Just pay attention to that stuff. Your eye can typically tell when it's looking a little bit funky. Once I have that bed frame, mattress, headboard set to the way I want, I'm going to start drawing the legs, the feet of the bed. So these are just going to be two parallel lines that come straight down and are parallel to the edges of your paper because those are going to be the closest to you. And then what I'm going to do whenever I get to them, I'm going to make them about the same height. to make them look nice and even. And then I'm going to add a curved line at the end of them. So these can be kind of confusing. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to kind of test out those converging lines. I obviously don't need those. That doesn't look right. So I'm going to bring them down and create these curved edges to make them look like they're kind of those round cylinder posts that a bed can sit on. And that's going to help it look nice and realistic. There's going to be one tiny foot of the bed peeking out in that top right corner of it. So I'm going to add that. It won't be very noticeable, but it does need to have something so it doesn't look like it's leaning against the floor in the top. So you'll see that in a minute when I add it. And I'm just going to keep fine-tuning these details on the bed, making sure that they are good to go and they look as realistic and as in perspective as possible. The thing with drawing a perspective room like this is you might run into situations where you have something down and then you realize when you draw something else that it's like not in perspective at all. And that's okay, but that's where we need to be paying attention to all of those little details and when we need to use parallel lines to the edges of our paper for our vertical and horizontal lines, or when we need to be using those converging lines. So just a quick reminder as we're in the process of this, as I'm talking about this, I'm going to start adding some pillows to kind of dress the bed up a little bit and make it look a little bit more homey. As you're working through it, just remember, any line that's going to run parallel to the edges of your paper, top or sides, top, bottom, right or left, those you will use your ruler to create these vertical lines. Any other line that's going to run at a diagonal to create that stuff and make it look like it's going back into space, you're going to need to use your vanishing point to create those converging lines. In a drawing like this, you're not always going to have to use full converging lines. You can use your ruler as a guideline, kind of how I did earlier with the door. You'll notice that I didn't take all of those converging lines all the way to the vanishing point, but I did make them the width and the size that they needed to be. So to make this continue to look a little bit more homey and a little bit more like a room, I'm just going to have some fun and add a little dresser to the right of the bed. And you can get creative at this point and do anything that you want to. You can add some artwork on the back wall. You can add some rugs or decorations or anything of the sort. It's really up to you. So you can start getting creative. The next thing that I'm going to add after this dresser is I'm going to work through adding a window. So watch how I do this dresser and how I kind of decorate it for a second, and then we'll talk through how to add a window. So to kind of make this room feel a little bit more complete, I'm going to add a window. So I'm going to decide how high I want that window to go, and I'm going to do it on this left wall. I want it to be a decently wide window so that my room is pretty bright and cheery. So I'm going to do the top line of the window first, and this is a really important one to use those converging lines. I'm not going to draw it all the way to the vanishing point. I'm just going to kind of decide how wide I would like it. Then I'm going to mirror that as exact as I can on the bottom part. And then this is where you'll use those parallel lines, so make sure you're lining up a right angle to the edge of your paper when you draw those in. This is where those box practices, doing those rectangular prisms and things like that, will come into play and be very helpful. So I'm going to add some detail to this window so it doesn't just look like this empty open thing on the side of my wall. And a really fun thing that you can do is you can start adding some curtains. But remember, if you add any details like this to your piece, always, always, always remember, things closer to us are bigger and things further from us are smaller. So you'll notice that I'm making this curtain that's going to be closer to us a little bit bigger. I'm going to extend it past that edge of the window frame just so it looks like it really is a curtain that's kind of sitting on the edge. And then I'm going to create a curtain rod. And when I make this curtain rod, I'm going to need to use that vanishing point. So just remember to pay attention to all those little lines and details. And if you ever run into something that you're not sure if you need to use a parallel line or the converging line, just ask me and I can let you know. These can be pretty complicated as you work through them, especially the first time you do them. So that's where practice is so important. And as I'm working on this curtain to make it look a little bit more realistic, I'll add some of those the tabs that kind of hold it to the curtain rod. And then when I go in to make my next one, I'm going to make sure that I make it a little bit smaller, a little bit like it's further back in the distance. So you'll notice those the parts that hang down, you'll notice that those are thinner on that back side. So as you continue adding some of these fun details to your piece, you're going to be able to make it pretty personal. And when you get to a point where you really like what you have, that's when you can start darkening up some of those lines and adding a few more little funky details. Your room should be much more detailed than my room because you're going to spend a lot more time on it than I did on mine. So I would love for you to add some of your personality to it. Come in and add some watercolor, some colored pencils. Just make sure you get it approved by me. This is really up to you. You could add some art on the back wall or anything that's kind of fun and funky. Enjoy this, be creative, have fun, and be sure to ask for help if you're ever unsure of what you need to do.